I saw my daughter-in-law Marissa throwing my granddaughter Deja's baby blanket into the trash. I didn't hesitate. I rushed toward the dumpster and fished it out before it disappeared under the garbage. Thinking of Deja, I clutched that blanket to my chest and took it straight back to my house. When I spread it out across my bed, my fingertips brushed against something odd. There was something hard sewn inside the fabric, hidden deep between the cotton layers. Curiosity slid through me like an icy shiver. I grabbed a pair of scissors from my nightstand drawer. My hands were trembling as I carefully opened the seam, cutting thread by thread. And when I finally saw what was hidden inside, I went completely numb. I had never imagined that something so small, so silent, could hold that much horror. Because what I found wasn't just an object, it was proof of a lie that had lasted for years. It was the truth about my son's death. It was the darkest secret my daughter-in-law had ever kept from me. And when I understood what it really meant, I knew my life would never go back to what it was. Before I go on, please subscribe and tell me in the comments where in the world you're watching this story from, because what I am about to share is something I still struggle to believe actually happened. My name is Sheila Howard, and I am 69 years old. I'm a Black woman with deep brown skin, tight silver coils framing my face, and the kind of lines around my eyes that come from both laughter and too many tears. I've lived alone in this little house for 3 years, ever since the day I lost my only son. Tony was only 32 when he died. It was in September on a Tuesday afternoon. I got a call from Marissa crying, screaming, telling me that Tony had had an accident, that he'd fallen down the stairs at their home, that he'd hit his head, that he wasn't responding. I made it to the hospital in 15 minutes. I drove like someone possessed. My palms were slick with sweat on the steering wheel. When I stepped into the emergency room, Marissa was sitting in one of those hard plastic chairs, her face buried in her hands. She was wearing a pearl gray dress. There were dark red stains on the sleeves. She saw me and jumped up, running toward me. She threw her arms around me and sobbed into my shoulder. I didn't care about anything except seeing my boy. I needed to see him with my own eyes. A doctor came out at that moment. He had that look doctors get when they're about to say something you never want to hear in your whole life. And then he said the words that shattered my world into pieces. Tony was gone. Severe head trauma. They couldn't do anything. I screamed. I sobbed. My knees buckled and I collapsed onto the cold hospital floor. Marissa held me up, whispering that everything would be all right. That Tony would have wanted us to be strong. But nothing was all right, and nothing ever would be again. My husband had died 15 years earlier from a heart attack, and now my son was gone too. Tony was all I had left. He was a brilliant, dedicated doctor. He worked long, punishing shifts at the hospital, saving other people's lives. 2 years before he died, he married Marissa. She was a nurse, also working at the same hospital. That was where they'd met. He introduced her to me one Sunday afternoon. I remember she wore a cream-colored dress and her smile was flawless, too flawless, like it had been practiced in a mirror. But Tony was in love. His whole face lit up when he looked at her. He told me she was the love of his life, that he wanted to build a family with her, and I wanted so badly to believe him. I wanted to believe my son had finally found happiness. A year after the wedding, Marissa got pregnant. Tony was over the moon. He called me every single day to tell me how the baby was doing, how big she was measuring, what the doctor had said. They bought a new house. They painted the nursery a soft, rosy pink. Tony assembled the crib himself, piece by piece. I remember watching him, his face glowing with hope and dreams. And when Deja was born, I felt like life had given me another chance, a fresh opportunity to love, to protect, to pour my heart into someone again. My granddaughter was beautiful, tiny, fragile, with Tony's dark eyes. I knitted that mint green blanket with my own hands. It took me weeks to finish it. Every stitch held a little piece of my love. Tony adored that blanket. He used to joke that it was magic, that whenever he wrapped Deja in it, she'd stop crying. He treated that blanket like it was a treasure. But after the accident, everything changed. Marissa grew distant. At first, I told myself it made sense. She was grieving too. She had lost her husband as well. She needed time and space. But as the months rolled by, she brought Deja to see me less and less. There were always excuses. The baby was sick. She had too much work. She was trying to reorganize her life. I didn't want to push her. I didn't want to be that meddling mother-in-law everybody complains about. So I waited. I called. I asked if I could come over to visit my granddaughter. Sometimes she'd say yes. Other times, she wouldn't even respond. And when she did allow me to see Deja, I started noticing something off. Marissa had changed. She was colder, more distant. The fake warmth that used to flicker in her eyes disappeared. Instead, there was something sharp and calculating in her gaze, something that made my stomach twist. But I kept telling myself it was grief, that Tony's death had hardened her the way it had hollowed me out. I tried to understand. I tried to step back, until that October afternoon, 3 years after Tony's death. I had bought some toys for Deja. I wanted to surprise her. I drove past Marissa's house, planning to leave the gifts in the mailbox so I wouldn't bother her. I just wanted my granddaughter to know her grandma Sheila was thinking about her. I parked across the street, and that's when I saw her. Marissa came out of the garage hauling several black trash bags, struggling with the weight as she dragged them toward the dumpster, and in one of those bags, I spotted something that made my heart stop. Deja's blanket. That mint green blanket I had knitted with so much care. It was crumpled, half hanging out of the bag. Marissa shoved it into the dumpster with a strange, almost violent fury, as if she hated that blanket, as if she wanted to erase it from existence. I froze. Why would she throw away something so special? Why get rid of one of the few things that still carried Tony's memory? I couldn't make sense of it. Marissa slammed the dumpster lid shut and went back into the house. I waited a few minutes, my breathing turned ragged. A mix of anger and sorrow burned inside my chest. When I was sure she wasn't coming back out, I stepped out of my car. I walked over to the dumpster. I lifted the lid. I dug through the trash bags until I found it. There it was, dirty, wrinkled, and smelling like expensive perfume mixed with neglect. I gently pulled it free. I hugged it tight against my body and drove home without once looking back. When I got home, I was shaking all over. I locked the door behind me and went straight to my bedroom. I needed to be alone with that blanket. I needed to understand why Marissa had thrown it away like nothing, like some cheap rag. I spread it carefully across my bed. I smoothed it out with my hands. It was filthy but structurally intact. The lace edging was still solid. The mint green color had dulled under the lamplight. I ran my fingers across the entire surface, feeling every bump, every loop of yarn I had knitted years ago. Then I felt it, right in the center, a hard, rectangular lump hidden inside the blanket. It wasn't part of the filling. It was something else, something someone had deliberately tucked in there. My heart sped up. My palms started sweating again. What was this? Why would something be hidden in my granddaughter's blanket? I flipped it over and searched for an opening, a seam that didn't belong. That's when I saw it. Along the bottom edge, almost invisible, was a row of flawless stitches sewn with thread exactly the same shade as the blanket. Someone had opened that blanket, slipped something inside, and sewn it back up with such care that it was nearly impossible to notice. I went to my nightstand and took out my sewing scissors, the same ones I'd used when I made that blanket. My hands were shaking so badly I could barely hang on to them. I took a deep breath. I found where the new seam began and started cutting slowly. Thread by thread, each snip of the scissors sounded deafening in the quiet of my room. It felt like I was prying open something forbidden, something I had no right to touch. But I couldn't stop. Not now. I cut the last thread. The opening gaped slightly. I slipped my fingers inside. They brushed against something cold and metallic. I pulled it out carefully, and the moment I saw what it was, the air rushed out of my lungs. It was a cell phone. Small, black, powered off, and clearly an older model, maybe 4 or 5 years old. I held it as if it might explode in my hands. Questions crashed over me like a storm. Why had Marissa hidden a phone in Deja's blanket? How long had it been there? Why sew it in so neatly? And why, after 3 whole years, had she suddenly decided to throw the entire blanket away? I rummaged through my dresser drawer until I found an old charger I'd kept just in case. I plugged it into the wall socket, connected the phone, and waited. The seconds stretched into eternity. My breathing was shallow. My hands wouldn't stop trembling. The screen flickered. A faint light appeared in one corner, indicating it was charging. I kept waiting. 5 minutes, 10 minutes, and then, finally, the screen turned fully on. There was no lock screen, no password, no pattern. It opened straight to the main menu, as if whoever had owned it wanted it to be easy to access, or had never imagined anyone else would ever find it. My fingers shook as I touched the screen. There were several apps: messages, gallery, contacts, notes. I started with the gallery. I tapped the icon, and what I saw froze my blood. There were photos, dozens of them. The first one was of Marissa. She was sitting in a fancy restaurant smiling, but she wasn't alone. Next to her was a man, young and handsome. He had his arm draped over her shoulder and was kissing her cheek. The photo had a date stamp. It was from 4 years ago, back when Tony was still alive, when Marissa was still very much married to my son. Something shattered inside me. I swiped to the next images. Marissa with the same man at the beach, then in a hotel room, then in a car, hugging, kissing, wrapped around each other. All of them were from 4 years ago. Marissa had been having an affair. She had been cheating on Tony, and he had never known. He'd never suspected a thing. Tears burned my eyes and spilled down my face. My son had loved that woman. He had trusted her completely, and she had betrayed him behind his back. But that wasn't the worst part. I kept scrolling. There were videos, several clips saved in a separate folder. I tapped the first one. The screen went black, then an image appeared. It was a home recording. The camera seemed to be propped on a piece of furniture. I could see a living room, Tony and Marissa's living room. I recognized the gray sofa, the coffee table, the framed artwork on the wall. Then they walked in, Marissa and that same man. They came into view laughing. She was wearing a lavender dress. He had his hand around her waist, pulling her close, and kissed her. They toppled onto the sofa together. The scene was explicit. Too explicit. I stopped the video. I couldn't stomach anymore. I felt nauseated, but I knew I had to keep going. I needed to understand exactly what I was dealing with. I opened the Messages app. There were long text conversations between Marissa and a contact saved only as H. I began to read. The messages were from 4 years earlier. At first they were romantic. Marissa poured her heart out, telling him how much she loved him, how much she missed him, how she couldn't stand being away from him, how she hated pretending with Tony. That name, Tony, my son, jumped out at me like a slap. She talked about him like he was nothing but an annoyance, an obstacle in her path. The messages continued, growing darker and more desperate. Marissa told that man she wanted to be with him, that she wanted a life by his side, but Tony wouldn't agree to a divorce, that he was too old-fashioned, that he would never let her go. Then I came across a message that ripped my soul open. There has to be another way. I can't keep living like this. I need him to disappear. The phone slipped from my hands and landed on the bed. My lungs forgot how to work. I read that line over and over in my head. I need him to disappear. It couldn't be real. I couldn't be reading what I thought I was reading. I picked the phone back up, my fingers numb, and scrolled further down the conversation. The man had replied, "Don't talk crazy. Just wait. We'll figure something out." But Marissa kept insisting. Message after message, her tone grew more frantic. "I don't want to wait anymore. I want to be with you now. Tony is the problem. If he weren't here, we'd be free." And then, a few days later, came another message, one even more chilling than the rest. "I talked to someone who can help us. You just have to trust me." The man responded, clearly uneasy. "What did you do? Who did you talk to?" But Marissa didn't offer details. She only wrote that everything would soon be taken care of, that soon they would be free, that soon they could be together without hiding. The messages stopped a week before Tony's death. Nothing more after that date, as if they had both decided to abandon that phone, to erase any trail leading back to them. I stood up from the bed. I paced slowly around the room, trying to process what I had uncovered. Marissa had planned something. She had been talking about making Tony disappear, and 1 week later, my son was dead. Had it really been an accident? Or had it been something else entirely? The doctor's words echoed in my head. Severe head trauma. Fall down the stairs. But now all of it took on a different meaning, a monstrous one. I picked the phone up again. I opened the Notes app. There was only one entry. It had been written 2 days before Tony's death. Tuesday, 3:00 in the afternoon. He'll be alone. It has to look natural. An accident. No one can suspect. My knees buckled, and I sat heavily on the bed. Tears streamed down my face, uncontrollable. My son hadn't died in some tragic stumble. My son had been murdered. And Marissa, the woman he trusted, the mother of his child, had been part of the plan. I didn't sleep a single second that night. I sat on the edge of my bed, clutching that phone, reading and rereading every message. Every word was a knife. Every sentence confirmed what my heart already knew, but my mind refused to accept. Tony hadn't died in an accident. My boy had been murdered, and the woman who swore to love him until death had orchestrated every last detail, treating his life as something to be rearranged like furniture or a work shift. Eventually, the tears stopped. All that remained was a hollow space in my chest, a black hole swallowing everything. My memories of Marissa, the image I'd built of her over the years. It all crumbled in just a few hours. When the first light of morning crept through the curtains, I made a decision. I couldn't stay silent. I couldn't let Marissa roam around freely as if nothing had happened, raising Deja with those blood-stained hands, the same hands that had signed my son's death sentence. But I needed help. I needed someone I could trust, someone who wouldn't dismiss me as crazy, someone who would believe me. I thought about the police, but how was I supposed to walk into a station holding a phone I'd dug out of the trash? How could I explain that I'd found it sewn into a baby blanket? I needed more than just this. I needed to understand the entire story. I needed to know who that man was, this H from the messages, and I needed to know whether they had truly carried out their plan the way it seemed. I decided to call Joyce, my neighbor of many years, a 65-year-old woman who had been my confidant ever since my husband died. She knew how to listen. She knew how to keep secrets. And above all, she knew me well enough to know I wouldn't make up something like this. I dialed her number. She answered on the third ring, her voice groggy. "Sheila, is everything okay? It's 6 a.m. I drew in a shaky breath. "Joyce, I need you to come over. Right now. It's urgent." There was a moment of silence, then I heard the rustle of her sheets and the thump of feet on the floor. "I'm on my way." She hung up. 15 minutes later, Joyce was knocking at my door. I opened it. She looked at me with concern. Her gray hair was pulled back into a quick ponytail, and she wore a mustard-colored sweater over her pajamas. "What happened? You look like you've seen a ghost." I moved aside so she could come in. I shut the door behind us and led her to my bedroom. The blanket lay spread across the bed. The phone was still plugged into the charger. I started from the beginning, telling her everything. How I'd seen Marissa throw the blanket away, how I'd rescued it, how I'd discovered the hidden phone and what I'd found inside it. Joyce listened quietly. Her expression shifted from confusion to shock to outright horror. When I finished, she picked up the phone. She went through the photos, the videos, the messages, the note, every last thing. Her hands were shaking as badly as mine had been. When she finally looked up, her eyes were brimming with tears. "My God, Sheila, this is evidence of murder." I nodded, my throat tight. "I know, but I can't just walk into a police station like this. I need more. I need to know who that man is. I need to understand everything before I take the next step." Joyce sat down on the edge of the bed, thinking, what if we check Marissa's social media? That man might be one of her contacts. It was a good idea. I pulled out my laptop, I opened Facebook and searched for Marissa's profile. It wasn't private. I could see her posts, her photos, her friends list. I started scrolling through her contacts. There were hundreds of names, far too many to go through one by one. Joyce leaned over my shoulder. "Filter by men whose names start with H. That's how he saved on the phone, right?" I nodded and applied the filter. Several names popped up: Harold, Henry, Harvey, Horace, and Herbert. I clicked them one by one, searching for the face I'd seen in those photos. Henry wasn't him. Harold didn't match. Horace was much older. Herbert looked nothing like the man in the videos. Then I clicked on Harvey Julius, and there he was. The same sharp jawline, the same dark eyes, the same crooked grin. It was him, the man in the pictures, the man Marissa had been cheating with, the man she'd conspired with to get rid of my son. "That's him," I whispered. Joyce squinted at the screen. "You're sure?" I picked up the phone again and compared the images. There was no doubt. It was the same man. I went back to his Facebook page and started digging. Harvey Julius. 38 years old. Lived in the same city as us. Employed by a construction company. I clicked through his public photos. There were shots of him at job sites, at bars with friends, at barbecues. But no recent pictures with Marissa. None at all. As if they had wiped away every trace of their connection. "We have to find him," I said through clenched teeth. Joyce nodded slowly. "Just be careful, Sheila. If he had anything to do with Tony's death, he might be dangerous." I knew that, but I didn't care. I needed answers. I needed justice for my son. I searched for more information about Harvey online and found his LinkedIn profile. It said he worked as a construction supervisor with connections to several companies around town. On paper, he looked like any ordinary working man, just another face in the crowd, except he had helped plan a murder. Joyce then suggested something I hadn't considered. What if we go to Marissa's house? There might be more evidence there, papers, emails, something that ties everything together. It was risky, but it made sense. If Marissa had gone so far as to sew a phone into Deja's blanket, there was a good chance she had hidden other things too. "We can't just show up and snoop," I said. "We need a reason to be there." Joyce thought for a moment. "Tell her you want to see Deja, that you miss her. While you keep Marissa busy, I can quietly look around." It wasn't a perfect plan, but it was all we had. We decided to try it that very afternoon. I texted Marissa. Hi, Marissa. I know I've been insisting a lot lately, but I really miss Deja. Could I stop by this afternoon just to see her for a little while? 20 minutes passed before she replied. Hi, Sheila. Today's not great. Deja's a little fussy. Maybe another day. I clenched my jaw. It was always like this. Always some excuse. But this time I refused to back down. Please, Marissa. It'll only be a few minutes. I bought her a gift and I'd really like to hand it to her myself. There was another long pause, then, fine, but only 30 minutes. I have things to do. That was all I needed. Joyce and I prepared our roles. She would stay in the car at first, waiting for my signal. If I managed to keep Marissa distracted, Joyce would knock on the door with some excuse and start searching. We would look for anything that could serve as extra proof. At 3 in the afternoon, we pulled up in front of Marissa's house. It was a 2-story place with fresh white paint and a neatly trimmed lawn, the same house where Tony had fallen down the stairs, where his life had ended. My heart hammered as I rang the doorbell. Footsteps approached, the door swung open, and there stood Marissa. She wore black pants and a salmon-colored blouse. Her hair was perfectly styled, and her makeup was as flawless as ever. Hi, Sheila, she said, offering a tight, cold smile. Come in. I stepped inside. The scent of lavender filled the air. Everything looked spotless, organized, almost staged, too perfect, as if nothing tragic had ever taken place within those walls. Where's Deja? I asked. Upstairs in her room. I'll go get her, Marissa replied. She went up the staircase, the same stairs where Tony had supposedly lost his footing. I stared at each step, searching for some mark, some sign, but there was nothing. Marissa came back down carrying Deja in her arms. My granddaughter had grown so much. She was 3 years old now. Her dark curls framed her face, and her eyes were identical to Tony's. Just seeing her made my heart ache and swell with love at the same time. Hi, Grandma, Deja chirped, in her tiny, sweet voice, holding her arms out toward me. I took her and pulled her into a tight hug. She smelled like baby shampoo and innocence. She was the only pure remnant of my son, the single bright thing that had survived all this darkness. I missed you so much, baby, I whispered. She smiled and proudly showed me a little brown stuffed bear clutched in her hand. She began babbling a story about him, full of childish fantasy. I listened, but my eyes kept drifting toward Marissa. Marissa was standing near the window, staring down at her phone. She seemed distracted, restless, like she was expecting a call or waiting for something to happen. I took advantage of her distraction. I slipped my own phone from my pocket and sent a quick text to Joyce. Come in now. A few minutes later, the doorbell rang. Marissa looked up, startled. Are you expecting someone such as I asked, as casually as I could manage. She frowned. No. She walked to the door and opened it. Joyce stood there, smiling politely. Hello, Joyce said. Sorry to bother you. I'm Joyce, Sheila's neighbor. I came with her, but I left a bag in the car, and I really need to use the restroom. Would it be okay if I came in? Marissa hesitated, her eyes flicking between Joyce and me. I nodded, as if this were the most normal situation in the world. Sure, Marissa finally said. Down the hall, first door on the left. Joyce stepped inside. As she passed me, she gave me the quickest little look. I understood. She'd used the excuse to scout around. I just needed to keep Marissa talking. I launched into small talk. I asked Marissa how work was going, how she was managing everything, if she needed any help with Deja. Her answers were curt, clipped. She kept checking her phone, clearly unsettled. I pressed on, filling the silence. I told her I'd found some old photos of Tony, that I'd like to share them with Deja when she was older so she could know her father better. At the mention of Tony's name, Marissa's shoulders stiffened. Yes, of course, she said, her voice strangely rough. When she's older. She glanced down the hallway. Your friend is taking a long time. Maybe she's not feeling well. I improvised quickly. You know how it is at our age. Everything takes a little longer, I said with a forced chuckle. Marissa didn't look convinced. She pushed herself up from the chair. I'm going to check on her. My pulse spiked. I had to stall her. Wait, Marissa, there's something I've been meaning to ask you, I blurted. She paused and turned back toward me. What is it? I drew in a breath, trying to sound casual. Deja's blanket, the mint green one I knitted for her. I haven't seen it around lately. Do you still use it? Her expression changed in an instant. For a brief second, pure panic flashed in her eyes. Then her face smoothed over. "The blanket," she repeated, forcing a smile. "Yes, of course. It's in the washing machine. It got dirty." She was lying. I knew she was lying through her teeth, but I couldn't confront her. Not yet. "Oh, that's good," I murmured. "I'm glad you still have it. Tony loved that blanket so much." I mentioned my son on purpose. I wanted to see how she reacted. Marissa pressed her lips into a thin line. "Yes, Tony loved a lot of things," she said, her voice edged with something bitter, something almost hostile. Before I could respond, Joyce appeared in the hallway. "Sorry I took so long," she said lightly. "I feel much better now." Marissa stared at her, suspicious. "That's good," she replied. Joyce walked over to me and brushed my shoulder gently with her fingers. That was our signal. She had found something and we needed to leave before Marissa grew any more suspicious. "Well, we don't want to take up any more of your time," I said, rising to my feet. "Thank you for letting us see Deja." I kissed my granddaughter's forehead. "I love you, baby. Grandma will come back soon." Deja wrapped her little arms around my neck. "Bye, si grandma, si Deja. Oh, she faz pipuride." Marissa walked us to the door. As soon as we stepped outside, she slammed it shut, a little too hard. Joyce and I made our way to the car in silence. Once we were both inside with the doors closed, I turned to her. "What did you find?" Joyce reached into her purse and pulled out a manila envelope. "This was in her bedroom closet, tucked under some boxes," she said. I opened the envelope and pulled out a stack of papers. They were documents related to Tony's life insurance policy. My son had taken out a $500,000 policy, and the sole beneficiary was Marissa. She had collected the entire amount 3 months after Tony's death. There were also bank statements. One showed a large transfer, $200,000, to an account under the name Harvey Julius. "My God," I whispered. "She paid him. She paid him to help her kill Tony." Joyce nodded grimly. "There's more." She pulled out another document. It was a copy of Deja's birth certificate. But something was off. The mother's name wasn't Marissa. It listed Faith Johnson as the mother. "Who is Faith Johnson?" I asked, my voice shrinking. Joyce shook her head. "I don't know. But according to this document, she's Deja's biological mother, not Marissa." The world seemed to tilt. None of it made sense. Deja wasn't Marissa's child? But I had seen Marissa pregnant. We all had. Joyce pointed to the birth date on the certificate. "Look at this. Deja's date of birth doesn't match what Marissa told us. There's a 2-month difference." I scanned the certificate. Joyce was right. According to the document, Deja had been born months before Marissa had announced her due date. "This can't be real," I murmured. "Did Marissa fake a pregnancy? Did she steal a baby?" Joyce swallowed. "I don't know, Sheila, but whatever this is, it's bigger and darker than we thought. But we need to find Faith Johnson. She's the key to everything." I went back home with Joyce. We sat in my small living room, my dark brown hands shaking as I spread everything across the coffee table, the phone, the printed photos, the screenshots of the messages, the insurance policy, the bank statements, the birth certificate. With all the pieces laid out in front of us, the picture finally started to sharpen. Marissa had engineered Tony's accident to cash in on his life insurance. She'd used Harvey to pull it off and paid him with part of the payout. But there was another twisted thread running through all of it, the story of Faith Johnson and little Deja. "We have to find out who Faith is," I said. "She's at the center of this." I opened my laptop and typed Faith Johnson into the search bar. Dozens of profiles came up, none of them matching what was on the birth certificate. I added our city's name to the search and tried again. This time something popped up, a local online newspaper article from 4 years ago. The headline read, "Young Mother Missing. Family Pleads for Help Finding Faith Johnson." There was a photo attached, a 23-year-old black woman with long braids, soft brown skin, and sad, tired eyes. According to the article, she had vanished, leaving behind her 2-month-old baby. "Deja," I whispered. Faith disappeared and left Deja behind. Joyce leaned in closer, reading over my shoulder. "Or maybe she didn't leave her at all," she murmured. "Maybe Marissa made her disappear." A cold chill snaked down my spine. "You think Marissa killed Faith too?" "I don't know," Joyce replied quietly. "But think about it. Marissa needed a baby to complete that picture-perfect family she was selling Tony. Maybe she met Faith, took advantage of her, and when she got what she wanted, she got rid of her." It was a horrible theory, but it fit. I searched for more on Faith's case. Another article turned up, this one from just 6 months earlier. Remains of missing young mother identified as Faith Johnson. They had found her body in an abandoned lot on the outskirts of the city. The case had been closed. Cause of death, blunt force trauma to the head, the same cause of death they had written on Tony's report. It can't be a coincidence, I said, my voice shaking. Marissa killed her. She killed Faith to keep Deja, and then she killed Tony to keep the money. Joyce reached over and wrapped her fingers around my hand. Sheila, this is bigger than us. We can't carry this alone. We need to go to the police. She was right. This was no longer just family drama. This was evidence of at least 2 murders, maybe more. We needed professionals. I picked up my phone and searched for the number of the local precinct. I dialed, my heart pounding. Central Precinct, this is Officer Julius. How can I help you? A man's voice said. I swallowed. I need to report a murder, I said. 2 murders. And I have evidence. They scheduled me for an appointment the next day. A detective named Melvin Carter would be assigned the case. They told me to bring everything I had. I didn't sleep that night. I tossed and turned, staring at the ceiling. My dark curls frizzed around my pillow. I kept replaying everything in my mind, Marissa's lies, Tony's death, Faith Johnson's missing person article, the discovery of her body, and Deja. My granddaughter wasn't my blood. But that didn't matter. Tony had loved that little girl with everything in him. In his heart, she was his daughter. He had held her at night, changed her diapers, kissed her cheeks, whispered silly stories to make her giggle. And now that child was living under the roof of a murderer, in the hands of the woman who had killed her real mother and her adoptive father. I couldn't allow Marissa to keep her. I had to get Deja out of that house. I had to protect her. But first, I had to make sure the police believed me. I needed them to investigate, to arrest Marissa, to fight for justice for Tony and Faith. At 9 o'clock the next morning, Joyce and I walked into the precinct. The building was gray and boxy, the air inside smelling like old coffee and photocopier toner. A receptionist greeted us. We explained we had an appointment with Detective Carter. She had us wait in a small windowless room with plastic chairs. 15 minutes later, a man in his mid-40s appeared. He was tall, with close-cropped hair peppered with gray at the temples, and sharp, watchful eyes. He wore a beige shirt, rolled at the sleeves, and dark slacks. Mrs. Sheila Howard? He asked. I nodded. I'm Detective Melvin Carter. Come on back. He led us down a narrow hallway to his office, a cluttered room lined with filing cabinets and stacked case folders. Photos of past investigations and what looked like solved cases were pinned to a corkboard on the wall. We sat across from his desk. He settled into his chair, pulled out a notepad, and clicked his pen. All right, Mrs. Howard, that's all, he said. Start from the beginning. Tell me everything. I took a deep breath and began. I told him about Tony's death, how Marissa had claimed it was a tragic fall down the stairs. I told him about seeing Deja's blanket in the trash, about retrieving it, about the hidden phone I'd found sewn inside. I told him about the photos of Marissa and Harvey, the messages where she begged for Tony to disappear, the note in the phone planning the exact day and time. Then I slid every piece of evidence across his desk, the phone, the life insurance documents, the bank transfers to Harvey Julius, Deja's birth certificate with Faith Johnson listed as the mother, and the articles about Faith's disappearance and the discovery of her remains. Detective Carter listened without interrupting. He took notes, his brow furrowed. He examined each document carefully. He scrolled through the phone, looked at the pictures, skimmed the messages, and read the note out loud. His face stayed serious, focused. When I finally finished, he leaned back in his chair and exhaled slowly. This is serious, he said at last. Very serious. If what you're telling me checks out, and it looks like it does, we're looking at 2 premeditated homicides, possibly 3, if we factor in the child's biological father. The biological father. The thought knocked the wind out of me. If Deja wasn't Marissa's, she had to have a father somewhere, a man who had been with Faith. Do you know anything about him? He asked. I shook my head. I couldn't find anything. The articles don't mention him. The detective jotted something down. I'll look into that. But first, I've got to verify all of this evidence. What are you going to do? I asked, my voice barely above a whisper. I'm going to move to reopen your son's case, he replied. I'll request an exhumation for a second autopsy. I'm also going to dig deeper into Faith Johnson's death and start looking hard at this man, Harvey Julius. A heavy breath escaped me. For the first time in years, I felt a sliver of relief. Someone in authority believed me. Someone was going to act. And Marissa? I asked. Are you going to arrest her? He shook his head. Not yet. I need more before I can get a warrant. If I go too early, I risk tipping her off and giving her a chance to run. I can't have that. It made sense, but it tore at me. And in the meantime, Deja is still living with her, I said. He gave me a compassionate look. I understand, Mrs. Howard, I really do. But legally, Marissa is the child's guardian right now. I can't just remove Deja without a court order. And for that, we need solid, undeniable proof. Isn't this phone enough? I asked, frustration bleeding into my voice. He sighed. It's strong evidence, but a good defense attorney might argue that it was planted or altered. We need more. Forensics, witnesses, clear connections that hold up in court. I felt helpless. How long will this take? Joyce asked. He shrugged slightly. Hard to say. If everything falls into place, maybe a couple of weeks. If it's messy, it could take months. Months. I felt sick. I didn't have months to leave Deja with Marissa. There's something else, I said. When I was at Marissa's house yesterday, she seemed really on edge. She kept checking her phone like she was expecting something or planning something. The detective noted that. Any idea what she might be planning? I shook my head. No, but it gave me a bad feeling, like she was about to do something drastic. All right, he said. I'll put discreet surveillance on her house. If she tries anything, we'll know. That eased some of the tension in my chest. At least she wouldn't be able to make a move without someone seeing. We wrapped up and he handed me a card with his personal number. If you notice anything strange, he said firmly. No matter how small or what time it is, call me. I nodded, gripping the card like a lifeline. Joyce and I left the precinct. The sun was high and bright, but I felt chilled to my bones. What do we do now? Joyce asked quietly. We wait, I said bitterly. We wait and pray they find enough to lock her up. The next days crawled by. Every hour stretched into an eternity. I couldn't stop thinking about Deja. Was she okay? Was Marissa suspicious? Was she packing bags? Was she thinking of hurting Deja the way she had hurt Faith and Tony? Detective Carter called me every couple of days with updates. He had brought Harvey in for questioning. At first, Harvey denied everything. He claimed he barely knew Marissa, that they were just casual acquaintances through work. But once the detective showed him the photos and the messages pulled from the phone, Harvey cracked. He admitted to the affair. He admitted that Marissa had talked to him about getting rid of Tony, but insisted he never agreed to anything, that he told her she was crazy and wanted no part in it. Unfortunately for him, the bank transfers told a different story. Carter pressed him harder, sliding the statements across the table, pointing at the $200,000 deposit Marissa had wired to Harvey 3 months after Tony's death. Harvey stammered that it was a loan, that she had given it to him to start a business, but he had no paperwork, no contracts, nothing to support that lie. I've got him on a 24-hour hold, Bl00d, the detective told me on the phone. I'm hoping he'll crack and tell us everything. If he doesn't, I'll have to release him for now. I don't have quite enough to keep him in custody. That same night, Harvey asked for a lawyer and clammed up. He stopped talking. Carter had no choice but to let him go, but the investigation kept moving. They exhumed Tony's body. The second autopsy revealed something the first had overlooked or ignored. There were bruises around his wrists that suggested he had been held or restrained before he fell. This hadn't been a simple stumble. It was homicide, Carter confirmed over the phone. Your son was held and then pushed down those stairs. Tears spilled down my face, hot and relentless. Hearing it out loud hurt in a way I can't describe. But Tony deserved the truth, even if it tore me apart. They re-examined Faith Johnson's case as well. The investigators discovered that the abandoned lot where her body had been found was owned by a company where Harvey had once worked as a supervisor. There it was, the connection. Harvey had access to that property. He could have taken her body there, left her in that lonely patch of dirt where no one would notice for years. They checked Deja's paperwork, too. There were no legal adoption records. On paper, Deja was listed as the biological child of Tony and Marissa, but the original birth certificate said otherwise. Someone had forged documents and overwritten Faith's existence. We're putting it together, Copta, Carter said. Piece by piece, it's lining up. We'll have enough to arrest her soon. Another week dragged by, a week of knot-in-the-stomach anxiety, of sleepless nights, of praying over that little girl's safety. Then, early one morning, my phone rang. It was Detective Carter. His voice was tight. "Mrs. Howard, I need you to come down to the precinct right away. It's about Marissa." My heart stuttered. "What's happened?" He paused. "She tried to flee. We intercepted her at the airport." I shot out of bed and dressed in minutes. Joyce met me at my house, and we drove together to the precinct. Carter met us in the hallway and led us to an observation room. Through the one-way glass, I saw Marissa sitting at a metal table, handcuffed. Her makeup was smeared, and her hair, usually perfect, was disheveled. "We arrested her 2 hours ago," Carter explained. "When she tried to go through airport security, our flag went off. She had tickets for herself and Deja, both under false names. She also had fake passports and about $500,000 in cash spread across several suitcases." "Where is Deja?" I asked, my voice trembling. "She's with Child Protective Services for now," he said. "She's safe, scared and confused, but unharmed. They're going to need you to come identify yourself as her grandmother so we can see if she can stay with you temporarily while we work through the legal process." I could barely take it in. Deja was out of Marissa's hands. I might finally be able to protect her. "I want to see her," I said, "right now." "You will," he said. "But first, I want you to see this." He hit a button and a video started playing on the screen, footage from the interrogation room. Marissa sat across from another detective, arms crossed, jaw clenched. "I have nothing to say," she snapped. "I want a lawyer." "He's on his way," the detective replied calmly. "But while we wait, why don't you explain why you were trying to leave the country with $500,000 in cash?" Marissa stared at the table in stony silence. "We have evidence, Marissa," the detective continued. "Messages, photos, bank transfers. We know about Harvey. We know about Faith. We know about Tony. All of it." At Tony's name, Marissa's eyes flicked up. Something dark and wild flashed across her face. "You don't know anything," she said coldly. "You can't prove a thing." The detective gave a small, humorless smile. "That's not true. We have the phone you hid in Deja's blanket, the one you thought you'd gotten rid of when you tossed it in the trash. We have the messages where you talk about your husband needing to disappear. We have the bank transfers to Harvey Julius." Marissa went pale. "That phone. How?" She cut herself off mid-sentence, realizing she'd already said too much. "Your mother-in-law found it," the detective said. "Sheila Howard, the woman you robbed of her son, the woman who is now going to keep Deja safe while you sit in prison." Marissa's expression twisted from panic into rage. "That meddling old woman," she spat. "I knew I shouldn't have let her near that child. I knew she was snooping. That's why I had to leave. That's why I had to disappear before it was too late." "Disappear?" the detective repeated. "Is that what you did to Faith Johnson?" The name landed like a bomb. Marissa's breathing quickened. "I don't know who you're talking about," she said flatly. The detective pulled a photo from a folder and set it on the table. "Faith Johnson," he said. "Deja's real mother, the young woman who went missing 4 years ago, the same woman we later found in a vacant lot owned by the company where your accomplice Harvey worked." Marissa squeezed her eyes shut. "I want my lawyer. I'm done talking." "Suit yourself," he replied. "But this isn't going away. We have enough to charge you with 2 counts of murder, fraud, and document forgery. You're going to spend the rest of your life behind bars." The recording ended. "She still won't confess," Carter said, turning back to us. "But she doesn't need to. The evidence is stacked against her." "What about Harvey?" I asked. "We've picked him up too," he said. "He's in a different room, and he is talking now. He's throwing her under the bus, claiming she manipulated him, that he was just following orders, that he was afraid of her." I wasn't surprised. Men like Harvey would always protect themselves first. "What did he say exactly?" Joyce asked. Carter flipped open his notepad. "According to Harvey, he and Marissa started their affair about 4 years ago. Marissa told him she was sick of her marriage, that Tony was boring and controlling, that she wanted out. She came up with a plan. Wait until Tony was home alone, push him down the stairs, and make it look like an accident. In exchange, they'd split the life insurance payout. She showed him the policy, $500,000. She promised him $200,000 and a future together." My stomach churned as he laid out how casually they'd discussed my son's life as if he were a number on a form. "At first, Harvey claims he refused," Carter continued. "But she kept pushing, and eventually he gave in. At least, that's what he says now." Joyce swallowed. "And Faith?" she asked. What did he say about her? Carter turned to another page. That's where things get even uglier, he said. Harvey says Marissa met Faith at the hospital. Faith came in alone, with complications in her pregnancy. No family support, no money, nowhere to go. Marissa saw an opportunity. She befriended Faith, offered to help, told her she could stay with her after the baby was born. My hands trembled in my lap. Marissa had been planning this from the very beginning. According to Harvey, Carter went on, Marissa lied to Tony, told him she was pregnant. She wore loose clothes and faked symptoms. Tony believed every word. When Faith delivered the baby, Marissa took the child. She told Tony she'd had a fast, unexpected home birth. Tony had no reason to doubt her. And Faith, I asked, my throat tight, what happened to her? Carter took a deep breath. Harvey says Marissa gave Faith some kind of sedative, something to keep her from fighting back. Then she took her to that empty lot outside the city, the one owned by the company where Harvey worked, and there she killed her. Same method she would later use on Tony. Trauma to the head. Tears flowed freely down my cheeks. Marissa wasn't just a liar or a cheat. She was a monster. She had murdered a defenseless young woman, stolen her baby, and then murdered my son to keep both the child and the money. And Deja's father? Joyce asked softly. The biological father? We checked what records we could find, Carter said. Faith never listed a father on any forms. Either she didn't know who he was or she chose not to name him. We're still looking into it, but right now there's no trace of him. I wiped my eyes with the back of my hand. I want to see Deja, I whispered. Please. Carter nodded and led us to another wing of the building. We entered a small room with bright walls and a box of toys in the corner. A woman in a blazer and sensible shoes stood by the door, talking quietly with a staff member. In the corner, sitting on the floor, stacking colorful blocks, was Deja. Deja, I breathed. She looked up. The moment she saw me, she scrambled to her feet and ran straight into my arms. Grandma, she cried. I scooped her up and held her tight, burying my face in her curls. She clung to my neck, trembling a little. She was frightened and confused, but she was alive and safe. I'm here, baby, I murmured. Grandma's here. Everything's going to be okay. The woman in the blazer approached us. Mrs. Howard? She asked gently. I'm Ms. Daniels. I'm with Child Protective Services. Detective Carter filled me in on the situation. We'll need to do an assessment before Deja can be released into your care, but at first glance, it looks like staying with you is what's best for her. I'll do whatever you need, I said. I just want to take care of her. I want to protect her. Ms. Daniels smiled softly. I can already see she feels safe with you. That matters a lot. I spent the next several hours with Deja in that little room. We played with blocks and dolls. I told her she'd be coming to stay with me for a while. I didn't mention Marissa, not yet. She was too young to hear about monsters in human skin, too young to shoulder the truth about her stolen life. That would come later, when she was older and stronger. For now, she just needed love, stability, and safety. Ms. Daniels carried out the evaluation. She asked about my health, my finances, whether I had help if I needed it. Joyce stayed by my side, answering where she could, vouching for me, promising to be part of our support system, Ms. Daniels visited my home, checked the bedrooms, the kitchen, the yard. She asked if I understood what caring for a 3-year-old full-time would mean. I've raised a child before, I told her. I raised Tony, and I'll raise Deja with the same love, maybe even more. She's all I have now, and I'm all she has. By the end of the day, Ms. Daniels gave her decision. Deja can stay with you as a temporary guardian, she said. We'll schedule follow-up visits and eventually a hearing to sort out permanent custody. But for now, you're legally responsible for her. I signed the paperwork with shaking hands. Then I took Deja's little fingers in mine and we walked out of that building together. Joyce drove us home. Deja fell asleep in my lap during the ride, her head resting against my chest, her tiny hand gripping my shirt. When we got back to my house, I carried her inside and laid her gently on my bed. I pulled a soft blanket over her and sat at the edge of the mattress, watching her sleep. In the dim light, her features were so much like Tony's, the curve of her nose, the shape of her eyes, the little crease between her brows. She didn't share his blood, but in the ways that mattered, she was his child. I promise you, I whispered, brushing a curl from her forehead. No one will ever hurt you again. Your daddy would have wanted you safe, and I'm going to make sure of it. Joyce stepped quietly into the room and laid a hand on my shoulder. You did it, Sheila, she said softly. You saved that little girl. I shook my head. No, I just did what any grandmother is supposed to do. What I should have done sooner. Don't do that to yourself, Joyce replied. You couldn't have known what Marissa was capable of. Maybe she was right, but guilt gnawed at me anyway. If I had been more suspicious, if I'd asked more questions, if I hadn't trusted so blindly, maybe Tony would still be alive. Maybe Faith would too. What happens now? Joyce asked quietly. Now, I said, looking down at Deja's sleeping face, Detective Carter keeps building the case. There'll be hearings, a trial, witnesses, appeals. It's going to be a long road, I told Joyce. But Marissa is going to pay for what she did, and Harvey too. Joyce nodded, her brown eyes hard. Good. They earned every second of it. The months that followed felt like living inside a storm. The case against Marissa and Harvey blew up in the media. Headlines called her the killer nurse, the woman who murdered her husband and her child's biological mother for money. News vans sat parked outside the courthouse on hearing days. Reporters shouted questions at anyone who went in or out. Talk shows ran segments about Marissa's double life, about the little girl who'd been raised by her father's killer. I did everything I could to keep Deja far from that circus. I enrolled her in preschool. I bought her new clothes, new shoes, little glittery barrettes she picked out herself. At home, I cleared out the spare room and turned it into her room. I painted the walls a soft yellow, the color of warm sunlight. I filled the shelves with stuffed animals and picture books, hung glow-in-the-dark stars on the ceiling. I wanted her to feel that this was her home now, not a temporary hideout from horror. But nighttimes were rough. Deja would wake up crying, sometimes screaming, reaching into the dark for Mommy. And my heart would twist, because I didn't know which mother she was calling for, Marissa, who'd raised her with lies, or Faith, whose arms she never got to remember. I couldn't tell her the truth yet. I couldn't say, your mommy is in jail for killing your daddy, or the woman who carried you was murdered for you. So I did the only thing I knew how to, and I held her. I rocked her. I hummed old gospel songs my own mama used to sing. You're safe, baby, I whispered over and over. Grandma's here. I'm not going anywhere. I will always take care of you. Slowly, over weeks, the nightmares came less often. Deja started laughing more, playing harder, coming home from preschool, with paint on her hands and stories about her new friends. She started to look like what she deserved to be all along, a regular little girl. That gave me hope. Detective Carter kept me updated as the case moved forward. Harvey decided to take a plea deal. He agreed to testify against Marissa in exchange for a reduced sentence, 25 years instead of life. It made me furious that he'd get anything less than forever, but I understood. His testimony would help nail Marissa to the wall, and if letting him rot for 25 instead of 50 meant she'd never see the outside of a prison again, I could live with that. Marissa, meanwhile, refused any deal. She wouldn't plead guilty to a single thing. Her lawyer went on TV saying the evidence was circumstantial, that there was no direct proof she committed any murders, that Harvey was lying to save his own neck. But the prosecution's case was solid as concrete. The phone with the messages, photos, and videos, the bank transfers to Harvey, Harvey's detailed confession, the second autopsy showing Tony had been restrained, the new findings in Faith's case. Everything pointed straight at Marissa. The trial was set for 3 months away. One afternoon, while Deja napped curled around her teddy bear like a little comma, I got a call from Detective Carter. Mrs. Howard, he said, voice more serious than usual. I need you to come down to the precinct. There's something you should see. My heart started pounding. What happened? I'd rather explain in person. Can you come this afternoon? I agreed. Joyce came over to stay with Deja and I went downtown. Carter was waiting in his office, a thick folder on his desk. He gestured to the chair. Please, sit. I lowered myself down, my hands already shaking. He opened the folder and slid some photos toward me, crime scene shots. One was the lot where they'd found Faith's body. Another was the staircase where Tony died. Remember I told you we were still looking into Deja's biological father? He asked. I nodded. You said there was no name on the birth certificate. That's right. Faith never listed a father. But we kept digging. We talked to her old coworkers, neighbors, people from her building. He tapped the folder. Several people mentioned she'd been seeing someone, a man who worked at the same hospital where Tony and Marissa worked. A chill ran through me. Who? He pulled out a photo of a hospital ID badge. A man in his early 30s looked out of it. Dark curls, light hazel eyes, a quiet smile. The resemblance struck me like a slap, something in the eyes, the jawline. For a second, I saw Deja in that stranger's face. His name was Jamal Price, Carter said. He worked in the lab, and based on multiple accounts, he and Faith were in a relationship. Where is he now? I asked, though a part of me already feared the answer. He died 3.5 years ago, Carter said quietly. 6 months after Faith went missing. A coldness opened up inside me. How? Single car accident, he replied. He supposedly lost control on the highway, went off the road, down an embankment, died on impact. Another accident. My throat felt dry. And guess who reported it? Carter added. Guess who was first on the scene? He didn't need to say it. I already knew. Marissa, I whispered. He nodded. She was on duty that night. She claimed she was driving home, saw Jamal's car go off the road, and called 911. When responders arrived, Jamal was already dead. Case was closed as a tragic accident. He looked me straight in the eyes. We believe she killed him too. My chest tightened. Can you prove it? Not yet, he admitted. There was no suspicion back then, no autopsy focused on foul play, but now with everything we know, we're reopening the investigation. There are just too many coincidences. First Faith disappears, then Jamal dies, then Tony, all within a little over a year, all tied to Marissa's orbit. My hands shook so hard I had to fold them in my lap. How many people did she kill? I whispered. How many lives did she tear apart? Carter closed the folder. I don't know yet, he said. But we're going to find out. I'm having every suspicious death connected to her patients reviewed for the last 5 years. If there are more victims, we'll bring them into the light. I left the precinct in a fog. Marissa wasn't just a murderer. She was a pattern, a system, a predator who removed anyone who got between her and what she wanted. Faith because she had the baby, Jamal because he could claim the child, Tony because he had the money. When I got home, Joyce was waiting in the living room. What happened, Kikae? She asked. You look like you've seen a ghost. I told her everything about Jamal, about the possibility of yet more victims. Joyce pressed both hands over her mouth. Lord have mercy, she whispered. It's worse than we ever imagined. That night, I didn't sleep at all. I lay awake staring at the ceiling, thinking of all the faces, Faith, Jamal, Tony, maybe even people whose names I'd never know, people who'd crossed Marissa's path and never walked away. The next morning, there was a knock at my door. It was Detective Carter again, still in the same wrinkled shirt as yesterday, eyes tired. We found more, he said. He came in and sat at my kitchen table, flipping open another folder. We pulled hospital records, Fisham, he said. There are 3 elderly patients who died under questionable circumstances while under Marissa's care over the past 4 years. All listed as cardiac arrest, all with some unexplained anomalies in their charts that no one flagged at the time. I felt dizzy. You're saying she might have killed her own patients? It's a possibility, he replied. We're getting court orders to exhume their bodies and test for certain medications, drugs that can induce heart failure if given in the wrong dose. I gripped the edge of the table. Why? Why would she do that? What did she get out of killing old people? Carter pulled out another set of documents. Money, he said simply. Always money. He explained 2 of those elderly patients had changed their wills shortly before they died, leaving large donations to the hospital. Marissa had been their nurse. She'd gone out of her way to be kind to them, to listen, to encourage them to give back. But those donations had never reached the hospital's accounts. The funds had been diverted into shell accounts. The paper trail once followed wound back to accounts connected to Marissa and to Harvey. My stomach turned. She had built a whole little empire of death, murders, forged documents, siphoned money, all while smiling in pastel scrubs and comforting families in the waiting room. There's more, Carter. Mom, Carter said. Harvey's talking more than we expected. He says Marissa kept insurance, documents, recordings, bank info, hidden somewhere in case he ever turned on her. Something she could use to blackmail him. What kind of documents, Aires? I asked. Bank records, contracts, and videos, he said. Harvey claims she recorded him helping with Tony's murder, that she recorded herself talking about what she'd done. Where are they? He says he doesn't know, only that she kept them hidden, probably in her house, somewhere he never had access to. My mind whirred. If those records exist, I said, you have to find them. That would be the last nail in her coffin. Carter nodded. We already have a search warrant. We're going through her house today, top to bottom. That afternoon, a team of officers descended on Marissa's place. I stood in the driveway with Joyce, watching as they carried in evidence bags and tool cases. We're going to tear apart every inch, Carter told me. If she kept something, we'll find it. They searched the kitchen, the bedrooms, the attic. They emptied drawers, opened vents, felt along baseboards. Hours went by. Then, from the basement, an officer shouted, "Over here!" We hurried downstairs. One of the younger officers had pulled a dusty bookshelf away from the wall. Behind it, set into the concrete, was a small wall safe, so discreet I'd never noticed the slight outline before, even when I'd been in this basement helping Marissa sort old clothes years ago. We'll need to open it, Carter said. They brought in a specialist from another unit. 20 minutes and a few soft clicks later, the safe door swung open. Inside was a treasure trove of evil, stacks of external hard drives, USB sticks, manila folders crammed with papers, printed photos. Everything labeled neatly in Marissa's precise handwriting. Dates, initials, amounts. It was her private archive, her record of crimes. It's like she wanted to keep score, Carter muttered, flipping through the files. Like she wanted to remember every single thing she'd done. Among the evidence were video files. They pulled one up on a laptop right there in the basement. On screen, Marissa appeared, sitting on a chair in what looked like this same basement, faking the camera, no makeup, hair down. Her voice was level, almost bored. If you're watching this, she said, it means I messed up. I got caught. But understand something, I don't regret anything. I did what I needed to do. I cleared obstacles out of my way. I took what I deserved. Tony was weak. Faith was a tool. Jamal was a risk. Those old people were opportunities. Her eyes were flat, completely empty. I feel no guilt, she finished. I just did what other people don't have the stomach to do. The video ended. Carter closed the laptop, jaw clenched. That's it, he said. Her own words, her own face. This case is locked tight. The trial started 2 months later. The courtroom was packed every single day, reporters, gawkers, relatives of victims, and a few hospital staff who just couldn't reconcile the woman they'd served lunch with in the break room with the monster on trial. I sat in the front row. I had to see it through. I had to look Marissa in the eye. When they brought her in, she wore a plain gray suit, her hair pulled back, no makeup. Without the careful polish and soft colors, she looked smaller somehow, but when our eyes met, what I saw in hers wasn't remorse. It was pure concentrated hatred. Not because she regretted anything she'd done, but because she'd been dragged into the light. Because I'd found that blanket. She looked away first. The prosecutor, a sharp woman in her 40s with a calm, commanding voice, laid the case out like she was building a structure, brick by brick. She played the videos from the safe. She showed the jury the phone Marissa had sewn into Deja's blanket. She projected the messages and photos. She walked through the financial records. She put up the autopsy reports and brought in medical experts to explain the bruises on Tony's wrists, the head trauma Faith had suffered, the toxicology results from the exhumed elderly patients. Every witness added another piece. Then it was Harvey's turn. He shuffled in wearing shackles, prison jumpsuit hanging loose on his thinner frame. He looked older than his years, haunted. He raised his right hand, swore to tell the truth, and sat down. His voice shook as he started. He described how Marissa had flirted with him, reeled him in, complained about her boring husband, how she'd shown him Tony's insurance policy, how she'd laid out the plan. Wait until Tony was home alone, restrain him at the top of the stairs, push him, and pretend it was an accident. I held his arms, Harvey said, staring at the table. She pushed him. I saw him fall. I heard his head hit the floor. My breath left my body, and I just stood there, he whispered. I didn't help. I didn't call for aid. I watched while she dialed 911 and screamed like she was hysterical. Tears blurred my vision, but I forced myself to listen. Tony deserved for me to hear the truth, as ugly as it was. Harvey went on. He talked about Faith, how Marissa had met her at the hospital, gained her trust, and brought her home after the baby was born. How Marissa gave Faith something to knock her out, then had Harvey drive her to that vacant lot. How Marissa had picked up a rock and hit Faith in the head while Harvey stood there, frozen. How they buried her and walked away. Then he described Jamal's death. How Marissa followed his car one night, waited until the stretch of road was empty, and rammed his bumper, sending him off the embankment. How she called it in and cried all the way back to the hospital as if fate had just taken him. The whole courtroom sat in stunned silence. Marissa's attorney tried to tear Harvey down. "You're a confessed criminal," he said. "You're lying to save yourself. You're putting everything on my client." "I'm not lying," Harvey answered, voice raw. "I have to live with what I did. This is the least I can do." Then came the experts. The doctors who had redone Tony's autopsy and documented signs of restraint, the pathologist who walked through Faith's injuries, the analyst who linked the drugs in the elderly patients to Marissa's access. Former coworkers testified about Marissa's charm, how easily she made people trust her. A few neighbors spoke about strange activity late at night, about Marissa's sudden influx of money, about her behavior before Tony's accident. Bit by bit, the picture became undeniable. The trial lasted 3 weeks. Finally, it was time for closing arguments. The prosecutor stood before the jury and spoke plainly. "This is not a story about one mistake," she said. "This is a story about a predator, about a woman who, over several years, chose to kill at least 6 people, husband, lover, vulnerable patients, a young mother, in cold blood. She did it for money, for convenience, for control. She stole a baby from her real mother. She murdered that baby's father figures. She robbed elderly people of their lives and their savings, and she felt no remorse. You've seen it in her own words, her own recordings. She isn't sorry. She's only sorry she got caught. She does not deserve your mercy. She deserves justice." Marissa's lawyer did what he could, talked about reasonable doubt, about relying on the word of a guilty man like Harvey, but compared to the mountain of evidence, his words sounded thin and brittle. The jury went out. 6 hours later, they came back. The foreman stood, hands shaking only slightly as he unfolded the paper. "In the matter of the murder of Anthony Howard," he said, "we find the defendant, Marissa Coley, guilty." My son's name, Tony's full name, rang in my ears. "In the matter of the murder of Faith Johnson, guilty. In the matter of the murder of Jamal Price, guilty. In the matter of the deaths of patients Ruth Ellis, Frederick Boyd, and Naomi Carter, guilty on all counts. 6 counts of murder." I looked at Marissa. Her face was a mask. No tears, no screaming, no collapse, just emptiness. As if she'd accepted her fate long before we got there. As if none of the voices, none of the lives, meant anything. The judge adjusted his glasses and spoke. "Marissa Cole, you have been found guilty of 6 counts of first-degree murder. I hereby sentence you to 6 consecutive life sentences, without the possibility of parole." The courtroom erupted in whispers and gasps. I closed my eyes. It was over. She would never walk free again, but I didn't feel joy, only a deep, aching emptiness. Because no sentence could bring Tony back, or Faith, or Jamal, or those old souls who just wanted kindness in their last days. Afterward, Detective Carter found me in the hallway. "Justice," he said simply. I nodded. "Yes, but the cost." He laid a hand on my shoulder. "You saved Deja," he reminded me. "You pulled her out of that woman's shadow. You gave her a chance to have a life that isn't built on lies." He was right. Deja was the reason I kept moving. When I got home, Joyce was in my living room with Deja, who was on the floor making her dolls have a tea party. "Grandma, where were you?" she asked, jumping up. "I had something important to finish," I said, scooping her into my arms. "But I'm done now, and I'm right where I belong." I buried my face in her hair. She smelled like cookies and crayons and sunshine. Everything good. Life quieted after that. The news coverage faded and moved on to other scandals. People stopped whispering when I walked into the grocery store. The trial became one more story in a long list of tragedies the world eventually scrolls past. I focused on Deja. We went to the park. We made up bedtime stories together. We baked cookies, hers always covered in too many sprinkles. She started sleeping through the night almost every night. The fear in her eyes slowly drained away. One evening when she was about 4, she tugged at my sleeve after I tucked her in. "Is it okay if I call you Mom?" she asked shyly. "I mean, you're Grandma, but you're like my mom too." Tears pricked my eyes. "You can call me whatever makes you feel loved, Seishe," I said. She considered that seriously. "Mom." "Grandma," she decided. I laughed. "Mom, Grandma it is. Years passed. Deja grew. She started elementary school. She made friends, joined the choir, came home with drawings of us holding hands under big yellow suns. Sometimes I'd catch a glimpse of Tony in her, the tilt of her head when she was thinking, the way she laughed from deep in her belly. It comforted me more than I can say. Joyce stayed my rock. We had dinner together every week, just like always. "You're stronger than you know, Sheila," she'd tell me. "You pulled that baby out of hell and gave her a future." When Deja was 7, she asked the question I'd been dreading. "Mom, Grandma," she said one night, lying in bed while I smoothed her hair back, "where's my other mom, the one whose tummy I was in?" I took a slow breath. I'd rehearsed this moment for years. "Her name was Faith," I said gently. "She was a brave young woman. Life was hard for her, but she loved you very, very much." "Why isn't she here, Vasai?" Deja asked, eyes wide and searching. "Because she had to go to heaven," I said. "But before she did, I believe she wanted me to look after you, to love you for her, too." It wasn't the whole truth, but it wasn't a lie either. In my heart, I know Faith would have wanted someone to fight for Deja. "And my dad, Wuka?" she asked wetly. "Your dad's in heaven too," I said. "His name was Tony. He was my son. He would have adored you. He already loved you even before he met you." "So you're my real grandma through him?" she asked. "Yes, baby," I said. "I'm your real grandma." She smiled softly. "I like that. That means we're connected by the heart." I hugged her close. "Exactly. By the heart." I didn't mention Marissa. Not then. Not for years. When Deja turned 16, I finally told her everything. The ugly truth, piece by piece. She cried. I cried. She asked hard questions, some I could answer, some I couldn't. We sat together on the couch late into the night, the old blanket folded between us. In the end, she took my hand and said, "Thank you for saving me, for not giving up, for giving me a life." "You saved me too," I told her. "You gave me a reason to keep waking up after losing your dad." We held each other, and I knew that somehow, in all that brokenness, we had healed together. I kept the original mint green blanket all those years. I washed it, mended the spots where the threads had stretched. Sometimes when the house was quiet, I'd take it out of the closet and run my fingers over the stitches, remembering how that little hidden weight in the middle had changed everything. Now, Deja is 21. She's in college studying medicine. She wants to be a pediatrician. "I want to help kids like me," she told me. "Kids who've been through scary stuff, who need someone who understands and doesn't judge them." I can't put into words how proud I am of her. Sometimes I sit in my armchair and think about what would have happened if I hadn't seen Marissa tossing that blanket out. If I'd driven past without looking, if I'd stayed in my lane and minded my business like people always say, Marissa would still be out there. Maybe more people would have died. Deja would be growing up shaped by lies, never knowing how close she'd stood to the edge. But something nudged me that day. Call it a mother's instinct, call it God, call it Tony and Faith whispering from somewhere beyond. Whatever it was, it pushed me out of my car and toward that dumpster. Joyce is still my best friend. She's 83 now. I'm 87. We meet almost every afternoon for tea, our hands a little more wrinkled, our steps a little slower. We talk about those dark days sometimes, but more often we talk about Deja's exams, the price of groceries, little aches and pains, silly memories. One afternoon, Joyce looked up from her cup. "Do you ever think about her?" she asked. I knew who she meant. "Marissa," I said. "Sometimes." "I wonder if she ever felt anything," Joyce said. "Any guilt, any shame." I shook my head. "People like her don't feel," I said quietly. "They calculate. They take." Carter told me once that in all her years in prison, Marissa never showed real remorse. She kept insisting she hadn't done anything wrong, that she had only taken what the world owed her. Harvey was different. He started writing apology letters to the families, to me. I never answered. I couldn't forgive the man who held my son while he was pushed to his death. But at least Harvey had the decency to acknowledge his guilt and try, however late, to make some kind of amends. He died of a heart attack in prison 5 years ago. He was only 53. When I heard, I felt nothing. No joy, no sorrow, just closure. A door quietly closing on a terrible chapter. Marissa is still alive, serving her 6 life sentences in a maximum security prison. Deja asked me once, Do you ever want to see her? To ask her why? No, I said. I don't need anything from her. Not answers, not apologies. I just need her to stay exactly where she is. Deja nodded. She had no desire to see Marissa either. For her, that woman was a shadow on the far back wall of her story, a warning about what people are capable of, not someone she owed anything to. A few months ago, Deja came home with a gift wrapped in lavender paper. Open it, Mom, Grandma, she said, eyes shining. I peeled back the paper slowly. Inside was a blanket, new, hand-knitted, mint green. My breath caught. I made it, she said, suddenly shy. I learned to knit. I wanted to recreate the blanket that started everything, the one you saved, the one that saved me. Tears blurred my vision instantly. I hugged her so tight she squeaked. It's perfect, I whispered. It's the most beautiful gift anyone has ever given me. That night, I spread the new blanket across my bed. Then I went to the closet, took out the old one, and laid it beside the new. They were almost twins, same color, same pattern, same weight in my hands, but they didn't feel the same. The old one carried secrets in its fiber, pain and lies and death stitched into the seams. It had been the key that opened a door to horror, and then to truth. The new one carried only love. You know, Deja said over dinner that evening, I've been thinking a lot about Faith, my first mom. I took her hand. Me too. I wish I could have met her, Deja said, eyes bright with unshed tears. I wish I could tell her thank you for bringing me here at all. I wish that too, I said softly. From what I've pieced together, she was strong, braver than she knew. She was scared and alone, but she still chose to bring you into this world. That says everything. Deja's voice shook. Do you think she'd be proud of me? I don't think, I said. I know. She'd be proud of the woman you've become, of how kind you are, of how hard you work, of how you refuse to let what happened define you. She wiped her eyes. And you? Are you proud of me, Mom, Grandma? I looked at her, the curve of her cheek, the way Tony's smile lived in her face. More than proud, I said. You are the reason I'm still here, the reason I get up every morning. You saved me just as much as I saved you. That night, I sat on my bed with both blankets in my lap. I thought about the long road from that dumpster to this quiet, warm room. The fear, the courtrooms, the funerals, but also the birthdays, the first days of school, the laughter around my little kitchen table. The old blanket had been the beginning, the thread that pulled the whole tapestry of lies apart. The new blanket was the promise, that Deja's future would be different, that we had broken the pattern. Now Deja is 21, almost 22. She spends more time at the library and the hospital volunteer office than at home. But every time she walks through my door, she kisses my cheek and says, "Hi, Mom, Grandma," like it's the best part of her day. One day, I decided to do something I'd put off for years. I went to the cemetery. Tony's grave had lilacs in front of it. I've always thought he'd like lilacs. A few sections over, Faith's stone was simpler, with fewer flowers. I brought fresh ones, purple for Tony, white roses for Faith. I knelt by Tony's grave first. "Hey, baby," I whispered. "Deja's doing so well. She's smart and kind and stubborn, just like you. I'm trying to love her the way you would have. I miss you every single day, but I'm still standing. For her, for you." Then I walked to Faith's grave. My knees creaked as I knelt down. "Hi, Faith," I said softly. "We never got to meet, but I want you to know I've done my best to take care of your girl. I love her like she was my own blood. She's strong. She's brave. She's good. You'd be so proud of her." A breeze rustled through the trees, warm and gentle, brushing my cheeks. For a moment I felt an odd, peaceful certainty, as if somewhere, somehow, Tony and Faith both knew, as if they understood that their daughter was safe. I drove home as the sun dipped low. Deja had dinner ready when I walked in, burnt on the edges, but delicious because she'd made it. We ate, we laughed, we talked about her exams, and about Joyce's latest stories from the senior center. That night, I wrapped myself in the new mint green blanket. I looked at the old one folded at the foot of the bed and thought about everything it had set in motion. That blanket had exposed a monster. It had saved a child. It had forced the truth to the surface, no matter how hard someone tried to drown it. Life is like water, I've learned. You can throw stones in, you can try to bury secrets deep in the mud, but sooner or later, something shifts, and the truth washes back up to shore. The old blanket will always remind me of that. The new blanket reminds me of something else, that love can be sewn into new patterns, that our story doesn't have to end where the pain began. 2 blankets, 2 eras, one family stitched together by loss and by grace. Before I drifted to sleep, I whispered a quiet prayer, for Tony, for Faith, for Jamal, for the elderly souls whose names I still remember. Rest, I thought. You weren't forgotten. Your suffering wasn't in vain. Deja lives. Deja thrives.